Hey everyone, it's Dr. Hayes, and in today's video we're going to be discussing some tips for NaNoWriMo in July. Yes, I am aware NaNoWriMo takes place in November, but in my opinion, if you are planning on participating this year, you really should be at the start of planning out what you're going to write. But just wait a second before we get into the tips. So if you don't know, NaNoWriMo means National Novel Writing Month, or just NaNoWriMo for short, which takes place in November, and the goal is to write a novel in November, or more precisely, a 50,000 word novel. So there are 30 days in November, so to hit the goal of 50,000 words in that month, you'd have to write 1,667 words per day every day in November. And your next question is going to be, okay, we know what it is, but why are you qualified to talk about this? If you didn't know, I'm a published author and I wrote my debut novel in 24 days, so less than a month, and it was longer than 50,000 words, that first draft, but I wrote a chapter a day and I was like, I can definitely do better than that. So the last novel I wrote was 140,000 words, which I wrote in 16 days. So yes, I am insane. But I am also very, very fast when it comes to writing. So since I did the equivalent of almost 3 NaNoWriMos in just over half a month, so 16 days instead of 15, I do feel like I am qualified to give you tips when it comes to speed novel writing. Even though I've never actually written in November with everyone else. I just do it when I feel like it, to be honest. So considering I am just personally a very fast writer, that's just the way I prefer to write, I do feel like I'm qualified to give you some tips, although please note, this is just the ways I write a novel quickly, and these tips may end up not being helpful to you and your process. Honestly, I would encourage you to watch other creators' videos, find other tips online, on TikTok, or just Google in general, and basically test a few things to see what combination of tips is going to work for you. I do think it's highly unlikely all of mine are going to work for you, and maybe only like 1 or 2 will, with a combination of stuff from another person or things you found out already on your own. So I would encourage you to do some more research and see how you want to tackle your NaNoWriMo this year. However, my process does begin a while before the writing actually starts with tip number 1, planning. Now for me, I actually plan for longer than I write, so that novel I wrote in 16 days, so I wrote it in 16 days. I was planning for at least 8 months. I will literally spend months upon months upon months planning, particularly as I am a science fiction writer, so I have a whole new world to create, which affects the plot, which affects the characters, which affects the relationships, it affects everything, right? So I do spend quite a while planning things out because it's not set in this world. Well, actually it was set in this world, but it was set in like a dystopian future. So it wasn't like created from scratch, right? Not like a complete new fantasy world. It was based on this world, but where everything was worse, basically. So obviously, if you are not writing science fiction or fantasy for your NaNoWriMo this year, your planning process is likely not going to take as long, but of course it really depends. Perhaps you're writing something set in the past or in a different country, and in that case, instead of creating a new world, you're going to have to do a lot of research about that world instead. But the tip is to plan, and to plan a lot, and when you think you've done planning, plan some more. What I usually do is I basically, after I've got like my general kind of concept for the book, I will just write ideas down as they come to me, and I'll just keep them in OneNote on my phone all together. They're not in any particular order, they're just there, all in one place. And when I feel I have a substantial enough collection, I'll then try and organise them and come up with the story and further develop it around the beats I've already written down. So I look at what I already have and I add to the world, add to the characters, add to relationships, add to the plot as I go. And then when I have like a very general kind of like this happens and this happens and this happens, I then write in bullet points how I want the story to go. So the outline on screen isn't for an original novel, it's for Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction. The initials I just use as shorthand for different characters because I'm too lazy to write their names out over and over again, but I just hit enter every line and you just see it's like a chapter outline, like this happens and then this happens and then this happens. As I'm planning, I also come up with lines I want some of the characters to say, so I don't have the full scene planned out, but I'm like, okay, Marinette, I suddenly have the idea in the middle of planning, Marinette can say this, Alia can reply with that, Adrian can then say this thing back. So that's basically my planning process. It really helps me, and honestly, once I've got like a full plan of start to finish the whole book, I do go in quite a few times to refine it and really flesh it out. So I have like a really clear roadmap of where I'm going. And honestly, personally, I would be lost without a solid plan and never get anything written. I basically do need a plan in order to write something like a novel. Now, I know people who aren't as familiar with novel writing sometimes aren't always sure about plans, or they think it might take the spontaneity out of your writing, but my experience with that is that it won't. The characters still end up taking control of the story. New things still happen, they say random things. Obviously it won't be as spontaneous as someone who hasn't planned out anything, but it's gonna help you. A plan is gonna help you so much when you sit down to write. Like, I can write 10,000 words a day, no problem, which is greatly aided by having a plan for me. That's literally my secret to writing fast, is spending quite a long time planning everything out. So if this is your first time ever writing a novel and you're not sure how you can achieve 50,000 words within 30 days, which I completely understand, you might be a bit intimidated if you've never done that before, I would definitely recommend doing a plan to you. However, tip 2, if you aren't sure having a full plan will help you, then I would advise you to at the very least plot how your book is going to start, the major beats within it, and how it will end. By planning this out, it's going to help so much with the structure as well as the pacing of your novel heading towards the ending. Like, I always feel like you can tell when a novel isn't well paced, and knowing where you're gonna go is always going to help with the pace and the overall structure. I do find having a full plan of everything aids even more with that, but if you really don't feel that will help and you just want to plan out the major beats, or if you don't have time, just get the major beats down, especially the ending. Which, tip number 3, also plan out how your characters will develop with everything that happens in the story. It doesn't have to be super in-depth like I would in tip number 1, where I plan absolutely everything, but I do think it would be beneficial to know, you know, at the beginning my main character's going to be like this, in the middle of the story they're going to be like this, and by the end they're going to be this way. That's the way I would personally do it if you don't have loads and loads of time to plan. So those are all like the pre-NaNoWriMo tips. So now let's get to the 1st of November. So tip number 4, I would say don't write immediately and actually listen to some music. So I feel like a lot of writers would recommend you to do a writing exercise to warm up, and feel free to try those. Personally for me though, they just do not work. And in fact, actually, I wear headphones when I write and sometimes when I read for silence. These are my headphones, they're not anything special. I don't know what brand they mix with 2 X's. I think I just got them online somewhere. Don't even remember. Not anything special, they're not particularly noise cancelling headphones, but when I put them on they just kind of muffle everything. Like in my, I think it was my 2nd ever video on my channel, where it was the day the most recent Hunger Games book came out. I went out to get it and I read it the full first day, and in the video I have headphones on and people in the comments were like, oh, what are you listening to? And I was like, oh, nothing. It just helps to muffle the noise a little bit. I really like writing and reading in silence. Actually, I like doing a lot of things in silence. There are very few things I enjoy not in silence. For example, crochet. I usually have something playing in the background, usually anime. But things for me that do require more concentration, like writing, I do just wear headphones. Not to listen to anything, just to wear headphones. However, so as you may have guessed, I do write in silence. However, before I start writing, I am not in silence. I listen to music, specifically music that matches the mood of whatever it is that I am writing. So for my last novel, every time I sat down to write for a session, before I started, I listened to Birds of a Feather by Billie Eilish, followed by Chemtrails of the Country Club by Lana Del Rey. Yes, it was a very depressing book, it was loads of fun to write. But these 2 songs really helped to ground me in the mood and overall feeling of my world. Now, these songs, I understand, are not going to be the same songs to you, depending what you're writing. Hopefully you're writing something a lot happier. But instead of just jumping in and writing, I would just sit and listen to 1 or 2 songs to really absorb how they make you feel and how they relate to the characters and their emotions in your world. And then when the songs are over, start writing. Which leads me into tip number 5, which is write. And by this, I just mean write. Do not think. For me, the planning stage is the thinking stage. In the planning stage, when I'm considering, okay, if X character does this to Y thing, then what is the Z result? But when I sit down to actually write, I do not think at all. That's why I always have such an in-depth plan. That's why it's so important to me, because I do all of the thinking during the planning stages, and then when it's time to write, I do not think. Head is completely empty. My head is literally empty when I write. The tip is just to write. Don't think about it. Just do it. The goal of NaNoWriMo is quantity over quality. It's just to hit that 50,000 word target, even if those 50,000 words don't make complete sense. But I do find this method, because I've planned so much, also helps me to achieve a good amount of quality too, because I have put so much thought into what's going to happen with the plot, what's going to happen with the characters, their relationships, all the emotions, you know? So with that in mind, tip number 6 is to have a goal each day when you write. I know I said at the start of the video you need to write 1,667 words to reach the 50,000 word goal, but honestly I wouldn't recommend sticking to that so prescriptively. If you can accommodate the time, which I understand not everyone can, depending on your lives, you may have children, you may be going to school, I understand, full-time jobs, I completely get it, but I would recommend setting a goal of like I'm going to write 1 chapter a day or 2 chapters a day. And personally I just always find reaching the end of something always helps me. I feel like I will have achieved a lot that day if I manage to do that, and then I can start afresh with a brand new chapter the next day. Now I know some people don't like doing that, they don't like finishing something on a dead stop, they kind of like to leave like the last sentence not quite finished so they have somewhere to pick up from when they come back to it the next day, and it kind of gets them back into, you know, the flow of writing again. Try that, definitely, if you think that would help. But for me personally, having a goal for the day rather than just like a word count is to actually finish something. If the chapter like ends being around 1,600 words, cool, great, you've also met the word count for that day. But if you go a little bit over, if you go to 2,000 words or something, just like try and reach the end of a chapter, you know what I mean? Just get to an end in the day instead of just leaving it hanging at the 1,600 word count for the day. Just try and reach the ending. So tip number 7 in that mind is to just finish. Doesn't matter if it's good, just finish it. Because tip 8 is for when you're done, because it's time to edit your novel. Now, I don't actually think you should do this immediately. Let's say you finish the novel on the 30th, you hit the 50,000 word goal, well done, it's a huge achievement if you've never done it before. But then I'd recommend like forgetting about it for 2 weeks, go back and do whatever it was you were doing with your life regularly before November started, have a relax, treat yourself because you absolutely deserve it, and then come back to it. And before you start making any changes, specifically big changes, like if you see a cheeky spelling mistake, definitely just correct it. But I recommend just sitting down and reading the full thing. Start to finish, read the full thing, and just make notes of any big things like plot things, character development, relationship development things that you really want to change, and then make sure you read through the whole novel before you start going back and implementing said changes. And the reason I think you should wait to start these edits is because when you're sat down writing every single day for a month, you're really emotionally invested in the writing, which is really good, don't get me wrong, but you basically want to break this bond a little bit, because when you finish you might have the mindset like, that was amazing, that was perfect. And it is amazing you've managed to do it in a month, don't get me wrong, but there's always going to be improvements needed. So if you kind of manage to take a step back, have a bit of a break from the novel, just, you know, have an emotional cut off from it, and then you can come back with fresh eyes, completely refreshed, and then start editing. If you reread it right after you finish, you're probably going to be like, this was amazing, no changes needed. If you wait a bit though, you'll be a little more emotionally removed from it, and you'll see that changes are needed. Which, tip number 9, edits are always needed. Always. No exceptions, unfortunately. Might not be as much as other people's, depending on how much you planned in the first place, but even the best plans don't always work out, so definitely keep that in mind. But anyway, those were my tips for NaNoWriMo. I don't think I am writing a novel this year. I'm in the middle of planning one out, but it's a fantasy one, and I am nowhere near finished with like developing the world, or even most of the plot, to be honest. I have my 2 leads, and I have some of the major conceits of the world, and I kind of have a bare bones of a plot, but I'm not ready. For the amount I plan, I might be ready to go in February. Okay, this is how much I plan. But anyway, those are my tips for NaNoWriMo. I'd love to know any tips you use for writing a novel in a month, and also if you're planning to participate this year. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!